I stood on the porch holding the deed, the paper soft at the edges from years of quiet loyalty. She slammed the door in my face, the lock clicking into place like a verdict. You've grieved enough, pack your things. My daughter-in-law's voice dripped with practiced sympathy. Grieved enough. After I paid for their down payment, after I buried my only child, after I kept her fed while she planned open houses behind my back, I was the one told to leave. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The words rang in Janine Harrow's head as the last line of mourners drifted from the funeral home into the cool Raleigh evening. The scent of cut lilies lingered, sharp and heavy, coating her throat with grief. She clutched Derek's framed photo against her chest, her arms trembling from more than just the weight. He had been her only son, her anchor. Now, standing in the echo of his absence, she felt as though the ground beneath her had cracked open. The crowd had been polite, whispering condolences that sounded borrowed from greeting cards. The church bells had long since gone silent, but in Janine's ears the silence roared. The procession to the cemetery had ended, the dirt was piled, the flowers carefully arranged atop the fresh mound of earth, and still she hadn't truly breathed. She found herself back at Derek's suburban house, the place she'd helped him and his wife start their lives in. The two-story colonial stood stoic, white siding gleaming under the dim porch light, as if unaware that its master was gone. Inside, the air smelled faintly of furniture polish and stale coffee, mundane, familiar, unbearable. Janine sat at the kitchen table, staring at a plate of untouched casserole a neighbor had pressed into her hands earlier. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. She tried to focus on it, anything to quiet the storm inside. That's when Lena appeared. Lena's heels clicked against the tile floor, sharp and deliberate. Her face was smooth, untouched by tears. Not a smudge of mascara, not a single hair out of place. "You've grieved enough," Lena said, each word deliberate, as though rehearsed. Her tone wasn't sympathetic, it was clipped, almost transactional. Janine lifted her eyes slowly, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "What? Time to move on." Lena folded her arms, her manicured nails tapping against her sleeve. "Out. You need to pack your things and go." The room tilted for Janine. She blinked, her chest tightening. "You want me gone?" Her voice cracked, the question laced with disbelief. This was Derek's home. Lena replied coolly. "You were just a guest here. He's gone now. So it's time." The words pierced deeper than any condolence card could mend. Janine's hand gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She felt the ground shift beneath her again, not from grief this time, but from betrayal. She rose without another word and walked past Lena, her movements brittle, like glass ready to shatter. She climbed the stairs, her hand dragging along the banister as if it might hold her upright. Once in the small guest bedroom she had called hers for months, she locked the door and pressed her back against it. Her breathing was shallow, her body shaking not from sorrow this time, but humiliation. The silence of the room pressed in on her, broken only by the muffled laughter of Lena on the phone downstairs. Janine buried her face in her hands, but tears didn't come. Only a steely, aching void. Hours passed, though she couldn't tell how many. The house had gone quiet again, Lena's voice no longer drifting up the stairwell. Janine finally moved. She went to the corner of the room, knelt before the old cedar chest she'd brought with her years ago. Her hands were unsteady as she turned the brass key and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in protective sleeves, were documents she hadn't touched in years. Her fingers brushed past photographs, insurance forms, and an envelope of Derek's report cards. Then she found it, the file folder with the crisp county seal in the corner. The deed. Her breath caught as she unfolded the paper under the faint lamplight. There it was, clear, undeniable, untouched. The name written in bold black ink, the legal owner of the property, Janine Harrow. Her lips parted in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't defeat either. Lena's words replayed in her mind. This was his home. You're just a guest. But the paper in her trembling hands told another story. Janine smoothed the document flat, her fingertips brushing across her own name. The irony hit her like a thunderclap. Lena had cornered her with arrogance, certain she had power, but Lena didn't know. She'd never asked. She'd never checked. Janine stared at the deed until her eyes blurred, her heart hammering with a strange mix of grief and a spark she hadn't felt since Derek's death. Downstairs, a door slammed shut, Lena moving about, unaware of the truth tucked inside Janine's room. For the first time since the funeral, Janine let out a sound, not a sob, not a gasp, something quieter. A breath that carried the weight of realization. The house wasn't Derek's. It had never been Lena's. It was hers. And as she folded the deed back into its sleeve, sliding it carefully into the chest, she whispered into the silence, steady now, almost defiant, "You made one mistake, Lena. You forgot to ask whose house this really is." The absurdity of it hit Janine like a cruel joke as she unfolded the deed once more, the crisp paper humming faintly in her trembling hands. Her name stood out in bold letters, as if the county clerk who typed it had been carving the truth into stone. She traced the ink with her fingertip, the edges soft from age but still holding power. That night, the memories bled in uninvited. She could see Derek and Lena sitting at her kitchen table years ago, their voices low and anxious. They had been broke, worried the bank would laugh them out the door. Janine had stepped in quietly, without fuss, sliding her savings across the table and telling her son, "Start your life. I'll make sure you have a roof." She remembered the pride in Derek's eyes. Lena's relief had looked like gratitude then, though Janine now wondered if it had been calculation all along. A knock jolted her back to the present. Rachel Cross stood at the door the next morning, hair pulled into its usual neat bun, realtor's blazer still on even though it was Saturday. She carried 2 lattes in a cardboard tray, and the kind of sharp gaze that could peel back layers of falsehood. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Rachel said, handing her the coffee. "I've seen something worse," Janine murmured, holding up the deed. Rachel's brows lifted. "She doesn't know you hold the deed. She never asked." Janine's voice steadied as she spoke it aloud. "She just assumed." Rachel gave a low whistle, shaking her head. "Good, let her keep assuming. Assumptions are her blind spot." Janine sank onto the couch, the steam from the latte warming her face. The words rattled inside her. Assumptions are her blind spot. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe Lena's arrogance was her weakness. But arrogance could still wound. Over the following days, Lena sharpened her cruelty like knives left out on the counter. She ridiculed Janine for the way she folded laundry, mocked her for leaving lights on, told her she was pathetic, hanging around like a shadow. Janine said nothing. Instead, she began recording. A phone set discreetly on the kitchen counter during arguments. Photographs of her belongings shoved into trash bags in the garage. A journal she wrote in every night, each entry detailing another jab, another insult. Rachel's voice echoed in her head. "Keep assuming, Lena, keep assuming." One evening, as cicadas hummed outside and the smell of rain pressed against the windows, Janine sat alone at the dining room table, scrolling through her phone. She wasn't looking for trouble, only distraction. But trouble arrived anyway. Her breath caught as she recognized her own wallpaper in an online listing. Zillow. High-resolution photographs of her kitchen, her living room, even the guest room where she slept, each staged with Lena's captions. "Charming home left to a loving widow. Spacious move-in ready." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Lena hadn't just assumed, she had acted. And Janine realized, with a cold clarity that stole the air from her lungs, that her daughter-in-law wasn't just trying to erase her from the house. She was trying to sell it, without permission, without rights, without even understanding whose name lay inked on the deed. The photographs were so sharp, Janine could almost smell the lemon polish on the dining table. Her phone screen glowed in the darkened living room, each swipe delivering a new offense, her floral curtains described as tasteful, Her son's leather armchair labeled cozy modern seating, her guest room, the one she slept in every night, called secondary bedroom, ideal for a growing family. Her pulse surged as she stopped at the headline, "Charming home left to loving widow." Loving widow. The words coiled like smoke in her chest. Lena had reduced Derek's life, and Janine's grief, into a marketing hook. "She's selling a fantasy," Janine whispered to the empty room. The next morning she slid the phone across Rachel's kitchen table. The coffee pot hissed in the corner, filling the air with a bitter warmth. Rachel peered at the screen, her lips thinning. Unbelievable. She scrolled with sharp flicks of her finger. "She doesn't even have the listing rights. Look, this isn't through a brokerage I know. She probably found some green agent desperate for a commission." Janine folded her hands in her lap, steady despite the fire in her chest. "She thinks it's hers to sell." Rachel leaned back, eyes narrowing in calculation. "Then let's call the fantasy agent. Pretend to be buyers. See how far she's willing to take her charade." Janine blinked at her. "You mean walk through my own house?" "Exactly. Let her spin her story with us standing right there." Rachel's smirk was thin, edged with steel. Sometimes the best way to expose a liar is to let them perform. 2 days later, Janine found herself pulling into her own driveway behind Rachel's car, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The lawn had been hastily trimmed, mulch thrown over the flower beds to make them look fresh. She could smell the chemical tang of cheap fertilizer hanging in the humid air. The door opened before they knocked. A young woman in a blazer too big for her shoulders greeted them with a rehearsed smile. "Hi, you must be here for the showing." Rachel stepped forward, hand extended. "We are. My wife and I just moved to the area." Janine nearly stumbled at the words, but Rachel's grip on her elbows steadied her. She followed, silent, as the agent ushered them inside. The house looked familiar and foreign at once. Furniture had been shifted, personal photos stripped from the walls. The air smelled of candles and furniture polish, cloying and staged. But everywhere Janine turned, her life bled through the quilt she had sewn, folded neatly on the couch. The oak dining table she'd saved up for Derek's guitar stand, empty in the corner. And then Lena appeared, dressed in a black sheath dress, her hair curled into glossy waves. She played her role with dramatic precision, wringing her hands, her voice trembling at just the right moments. "My husband passed so suddenly," she told the agent, then turned to Rachel with a rehearsed look of fragility. "This house, it's just too painful. I need to move on." Janine's throat tightened, but she said nothing. She walked the rooms in silence, her fingertips brushing doorframes as though reacquainting herself with a body someone else had dressed up. In the kitchen, Lena gestured toward the granite countertops. "He picked these out. Every corner of this place holds a memory." Rachel nodded politely, but her eyes flicked to Janine, who clenched her jaw until it ached. The tour wound down in the living room, the agent chirping about ample space for entertaining. Lena added in a hushed, tearful tone, "It's truly a widow's loss, but someone else should make it a home." Rachel slipped an arm around Janine's shoulders, playing her part. "We'll think about it, but do you have other showings scheduled?" The young agent brightened. "Yes, we're hosting an open house this Sunday. Should be a great turnout." Janine's blood chilled. Her house, her name still stamped on the deed, was about to be paraded to strangers like a stage set. The morning air was heavy with the scent of cut grass and damp soil, the kind of sticky humidity that clung to the skin. Janine sat in her car at the edge of the driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it might steady her pulse. Through the window she watched Lena march across the lawn, black dress snapping in the breeze, lugging a trash bag that bulged with Janine's belongings. The sound of porcelain, shattering faintly echoed when Lena dropped the bag against the curb. Inside, strangers shuffled about. She could hear muffled voices, the scrape of chairs being dragged, the hollow thud of furniture shoved into place. The house that had once smelled of Derek's cologne and Sunday coffee now reeked of scented candles, burning too strong, trying too hard. Janine's throat tightened as she saw her quilt, stitched by her own hands, being folded and stuffed into another bag, discarded like clutter. She closed her eyes, swallowing down the mix of grief and fury rising in her chest. By noon the first cars began rolling in. Couples in khakis and sundresses stepped out, adjusting sunglasses and smoothing hair before walking up the path. Lena greeted them with a practiced wobble in her voice. "Welcome, welcome, thank you for coming. My husband passed so suddenly," she said, pausing as if emotion threatened to break her. Her eyes remained dry, her smile intact. "This home holds so many memories, but it's time for me to move forward." A couple nodded sympathetically, murmuring how brave she was. Another whispered about the square footage. From her vantage point at the curb, Janine's nails dug crescent moons into her palms. She couldn't stand another minute of it. The lies, the performance, the erasure of everything she had built. She opened the car door, her sandals crunching against the gravel as she walked toward the front steps. Inside, the house buzzed with polite chatter. Guests admired the crown molding, the spacious layout. The realtor stood near the dining room with a clipboard beaming. And then Janine spoke, her voice cutting through the chatter like glass shattering. "Actually," she said, stepping into the room, "I lost my son, and this is my home." The silence was immediate, thick enough to choke on. Every head turned. The couple by the fireplace shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Lena and Janine. The realtor froze, smile collapsing, pen hovering midair. Lena's face drained of color, then flushed red in a rush of fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, teeth clenched. Janine didn't flinch. She moved deeper into the living room, the soft thud of her sandals on the hardwood echoing louder than the murmurs rising around them. "Protecting what's mine." One by one, the guests began edging toward the door, murmuring excuses, suddenly remembering they had other places to be. The sympathetic expressions they had reserved for Lena shifted to suspicion, discomfort, and finally avoidance. Within minutes the house emptied. The only sounds left were the faint tick of the thermostat, and Lena's sharp, uneven breathing. The realtor, pale and sweating, tugged Janine gently by the elbow. "Could I speak to you privately?" he asked, his voice dropping low. He led her toward the hallway, glancing nervously over his shoulder at Lena, who stood rigid, fists clenched at her sides. When they were out of earshot, his voice cracked in a whisper. "Mame, there's something you need to know. She gave us documents, ownership transfer papers." But he hesitated, lowering his clipboard as if it were suddenly too heavy. "The notary seal doesn't check out. I think she forged them." The realtor's words clung to Janine's skin like a fever. Forged documents. The phrase echoed long after the last guest had fled the open house. That night she sat at her dining table with Rachel across from her. The two women hunched over a stack of papers that smelled faintly of ink and candle wax. Janine's hands trembled as she slid the forged documents across the wood, the paper slick under her fingertips. Rachel leaned closer, slipping on her reading glasses, her eyes darting back and forth across the page. "Look at this," she muttered, tapping the signature line with her pen. "That's supposed to be Derek's, right? It looks like a child tried to mimic cursive." Janine pulled out her folder, unfolding the real deed with the same care one might give an heirloom quilt. She spread it beside Lena's version, the weight of truth and forgery laid bare. "I held the pen when Derek signed this," Janine whispered. "That," she jabbed at the crooked scrawl on Lena's paper, "is not his hand." Rachel flipped to the back page, her brows furrowing. "And here's the notary seal." She tilted the paper toward the lamplight, revealing a blurred stamp with an illegible name. "I looked it up. The notary doesn't exist. There's no license number registered. Nothing." Janine stared, her stomach clenching. She went that far. She created people out of thin air? Rachel nodded grimly. "This isn't just overstepping. This is fraud. She's in over her head." The words carried a strange current, part dread, part vindication. Janine touched her own deed again, steadying herself with the clean weight of the inked letters. The house was hers. It had always been hers. But now she had something even stronger. Proof that Lena had lied, fabricated, deceived. By the following morning, they were seated in a lovely office with wide windows overlooking Glenwood Avenue, papers spread neatly on a polished oak desk. The attorney, a calm man with silver hair and a careful voice, adjusted his glasses as he compared both sets of documents. His office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the air-conditioned hum steady as a metronome. "Your daughter-in-law submitted this?" he asked, finally holding the forged deed between two fingers as though it were contaminated. "Yes," Janine said. Her voice didn't tremble this time. The lawyer leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then it's straightforward. We have the original deed in your name, notarized and filed correctly. What she produced here is fraudulent, and we can have her removed legally." He folded his hands, pausing deliberately. But first, Janine's heart thudded. Rachel leaned forward. "First what?" The attorney gave a half smile, the kind that knew its weight. "You'll need to decide how quickly you want this done. An eviction order would put her out within weeks. Or we could pursue criminal charges, fraud, forgery, attempted sale without consent. That would follow her for the rest of her life." The silence in the office stretched. Outside, the faint honk of traffic seeped in through the glass. Janine stared at the forged signature again, the shaky attempt at Derek's name, her son reduced to a counterfeit flourish on stolen paper. She could end it here. File the order, have Lena tossed out. Justice served neatly. But the thought landed flat in her chest. Too easy, too merciful. Janine straightened in her chair, her voice low but steady, carrying a new edge. "No, not yet." Rachel turned to her, eyes narrowing. "Janine," she folded the real deed carefully, sliding it back into her folder with deliberate calm. "I don't just want her gone," her gaze fixed on the window, the city beyond it indifferent to her storm. "I want her to beg first." The morning after the lawyer's office, Janine stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes in silence. The window above the basin framed the neighborhood like a moving photograph. Kids pedaling bikes, sprinklers hissing across lawns, the faint buzz of cicadas rising in the Carolina humidity. Inside, the house smelled faintly of bleach and overbrewed coffee. Lena's new routine of scrubbing surfaces before strangers came to view her home. Janine dried the plates one by one, stacking them carefully. Her movements were deliberate, restrained, every gesture small enough to pass for obedience. Lena breezed through the kitchen, sunglasses perched atop her head, though she hadn't been outside yet. She smirked at the sight of Janine with dish towel in hand. "Finally learning your place?" Lena asked, her voice laced with mock sweetness. Janine's lips curved faintly, but she didn't answer. Silence, she had realized, was stronger than argument. Silence gave her space to watch. And while Lena mistook it for weakness, Janine wielded it like a weapon. She kept to this script for days. She cooked simple dinners, left the laundry folded on the couch, scrubbed countertops until they gleamed. Lena grew smug, mistaking compliance for surrender. She began talking louder on the phone, boasting to friends about getting things under control, and making the house mine for real. What Lena didn't notice was the phone Janine propped discreetly on the counter during those calls, its red light blinking faintly as it recorded. Or the photographs Janine snapped late at night, trash bags stuffed with her belongings, Lena's wine bottles lined up like trophies of carelessness, or the journal where Janine wrote word-for-word quotes, capturing every insult Lena flung at her like stones. Rachel was her quiet ally in the background. They met at a corner cafe, the smell of espresso sharp in the air, papers hidden between the covers of a real estate magazine. Rachel slid an envelope across the table, her nails clicking softly against the cardboard. "It's ready," she said. Janine opened the flap, just enough to see the typed eviction notice inside, official and unflinching. Her name at the top, the legal authority at her fingertips. "You just need to sign," Rachel added, her eyes steady. Janine closed the envelope and slipped it back across the table. "Not yet." Rachel studied her for a beat. "Then what are you waiting for?" Janine sipped her coffee, the bitterness steadying her tongue. For her to feel it, to believe she won before she falls. Later that week she sat in the grief support circle, folding her hands in her lap. Claire, the group leader, spoke gently, her voice like warm cloth against raw skin. Grief doesn't mean surrender. You can mourn and still draw lines. Both things can exist. When the others shared, Janine remained quiet, listening, absorbing. Only when the room had thinned did she linger behind, her voice low enough for only Claire to hear. I'm grieving while building the door she'll walk out of. Claire's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them. Good. That's not vengeance, Janine. That's survival. The words sat with her, heavy but clarifying. Survival didn't mean shrinking. It meant planning. That night, Janine padded barefoot across the darkened house. The hardwood was cool under her soles, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She passed the living room where Derek's empty guitar stand waited like a sentinel. She touched it briefly, then moved on, climbing the stairs with steady resolve. Upstairs, Lena's door was cracked open. Janine heard laughter, sharp, smug, filtered through the glow of her phone screen. She leaned closer. Yes, the house is practically mine already. Lena whispered into the speaker. She's too old and too broken to fight me. I'll change the locks this week, just to make the point. Janine froze, breath caught in her throat. Her fingers curled tight around the railing until her knuckles ached. She backed away before Lena could notice, retreating to her own room with the quiet precision of someone preparing for war. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the ceiling fan blades sliding across her face. The eviction notice pulsed in her mind like a loaded gun she hadn't yet fired. Lena thought she was winning. She thought Janine had submitted. But tomorrow the game would change. The paper bag split as Janine shifted it against her hip, oranges rolling down the porch steps and scattering across the concrete. She bent quickly, fumbling to gather them, but her hands stilled when her key wouldn't turn in the lock. She tried again, once, twice, the familiar scrape replaced by a dull, unyielding click. Her chest tightened. Behind the door, footsteps approached. The lock rattled, and then the door swung open. Lena leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a smirk carved into her face. Problem? Janine steadied her voice. My key doesn't work. Right. Lena tilted her head, feigning innocence. Because I changed the locks. This is my home now. You don't belong here. Janine set the grocery bag down, her fingers brushing the bruise-colored wood of the doorframe. You don't have the right. Lena's smile widened, almost playful. Call the cops. See who they believe, the grieving widow or the bitter mother-in-law hanging on too long. A car pulled into the driveway before Janine could answer. Rachel stepped out, heels crunching against the gravel. She took in the scene, the bag of groceries on the ground, Lena's smug grin, and her eyes narrowed. Actually, Rachel said, her voice sharp as glass. I will. Minutes later, the flashing red and blue glow of a patrol car bathed the front of the house. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as two officers stepped out, the smell of rain-heavy air thick around them. One officer approached Janine. Ma'am, you the one locked out. Janine nodded, pulling the manila folder from her bag. The papers felt heavy, weighted with truth. I am the owner. She changed the locks. The officer took the folder, flipping through the deed, the county stamp, the notarized pages. Janine held her breath, every second stretching. He passed the second set of papers, Lena's forgery, to his partner. The younger cop's brow furrowed. This notary doesn't exist. Ma'am, he turned to Lena, you don't own this property. The color drained from Lena's face, replaced quickly by a flush of fury. That's ridiculous. Derek wanted me to have this house. She's manipulating everyone. Enough. The officer cut her off. You cannot change locks on property that isn't yours. Do it again, and we'll have grounds to arrest you for trespassing and fraud. The words landed with a finality that silenced the humid night. Janine watched Lena's lips tremble, her eyes darting between the officers and Rachel's steady glare. Open the door, the cop ordered. With a hiss of breath, Lena twisted the key she'd kept in her pocket. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and the scent of lemon cleaner and cheap candles drifted into the night. Janine stepped inside first, her footsteps deliberate, her presence reclaiming the air. Lena followed, seething, her shoulders stiff. She muttered under her breath, but the officer's watchful eyes kept her venom contained. Rachel leaned close to Janine as they entered the hallway. "It's time," she whispered. That night, while Lena sulked upstairs, Janine spread the eviction papers across the dining table. The wood beneath her fingers felt cool, grounding. She signed her name with calm precision, the pen gliding across the page like a blade drawn clean. At dawn, the sheriff's deputy arrived. Lena answered the door in pajama pants and a wrinkled tank top, hair sticking out in uneven tufts. She squinted against the morning light, clutching her phone as if it might save her. "Lena Harrow?" the deputy asked. She nodded, confused. He handed her the envelope. "You've been served. 30 days. Janine stood in the hallway, arms folded, watching as Lena's face drained of color. For the first time, the smirk faltered, replaced by something Janine had been waiting for: fear. The deputy's car had barely pulled away when the screaming began. Lena stood in the foyer, clutching the eviction notice, her hair wild, her voice ricocheting off the walls. "This is a joke. You think you can just throw me out like garbage? I'll call a lawyer. I'll sue you for everything." Janine stepped from the hallway into the light, her posture calm, her voice even. "Doe, I'd love to show him the forgery you tried to pass off as Derek's signature." Lena froze for half a second, just long enough for the words to strike, before slamming the paper against the wall. "You don't scare me," she spat, but her voice cracked at the edges. Rachel, leaning against the banister with her arms crossed, let out a dry chuckle. "You've got 30 days, Lena." Tick-tock. The neighborhood was watching. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted. By afternoon, whispers had already rippled down the street. The grieving widow wasn't so sympathetic anymore. The story spreading wasn't of loss, it was of fraud, of locks changed illegally, of police cars in the driveway. Lena noticed every side glance at the grocery store, every polite smile that faded too quickly. It gnawed at her. By evening, she was pacing the living room, a half-empty glass of wine in hand. "They're all against me," she muttered. "Even my friends. No one understands what I'm going through." Janine said nothing. She sat in Derek's old chair with the lamp casting her in a quiet halo, knitting needles clicking softly. The rhythm soothed her, but it also amplified Lena's unraveling. "You think you've won, don't you?" Lena snapped suddenly, her words slurred with drink. She staggered toward Janine, pointing the wine glass like a weapon. "Sitting there like some saint while you ruin my life." Janine didn't look up from the yarn. "I'm not ruining anything. You're doing that on your own." The glass slammed onto the coffee table, red drops splattering across a stack of coasters. Lena's chest heaved, her breaths uneven. "I hate you," she whispered. Janine placed the needles down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "Then it's mutual." That night, Claire called. Her voice over the line was steady, low, carrying the kind of firmness Janine had come to depend on. "You're not just protecting a home, Janine. You're reclaiming your life. Don't lose sight of that." "I won't," Janine said softly, glancing toward the hallway where Lena's shadow moved restlessly back and forth. "Not anymore." The days that followed were loud and bitter. Lena drank more, her wine bottles clinking in the recycling bin each morning like a tally of her spiral. She screamed about betrayal, about fate, about Derek, her words twisting into self-pity and rage in equal measure. Rachel stopped by often, delivering updates with clinical precision. "Sheriff says the 30-day clock started the second she was served. No wiggle room. End of the month she's out." Each reminder pressed deeper into Lena's nerves. Her smugness was gone, replaced with frantic energy. She picked fights over trivial things: lights left on, milk in the fridge going sour, a creak in the floorboard at night. The house, once her stage, was becoming her cage. Janine kept her composure, her silence sharpened by the knowledge that the deed sat secure in her folder, waiting for the final day. She almost pitied Lena. Almost, but pity curdled the night she woke to the faint metallic jingle of jewelry. The clock read 2:14 a.m., the floor creaked in the hallway. Janine rose from bed, heart pounding, and eased her door open. Down the hall, bathed in moonlight, Lena crouched over the open jewelry box Janine had kept on her dresser for decades. A gold chain dangled from her hand. Derek's college ring caught between her fingers. The moonlight caught the gold chain as it slipped between Lena's fingers, glinting cold against her skin. Janine's breath sharpened, her body still as she watched from the shadow of the doorway. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets she'd tucked in the drawers years ago, now tainted by the sour edge of Lena's perfume. "Put it down," Janine said, her voice steady, low enough to slice through the silence. Lena flinched, the chain slipping from her grip to clatter against the wooden dresser. She spun, eyes wide before narrowing into defiance. "I was just looking. Still pretending this is yours." Janine stepped into the room, the hardwood cool under her bare feet. Her gaze locked on Lena's trembling hands. The thief caught mid-act. Lena's lip quivered, but her words came out sharp, desperate. "He promised this to me. Derek said I'd have everything when he was gone." Her voice cracked, climbing higher, straining under the weight of the lie. Janine advanced slowly, folding her arms, her tone razor calm. "Then why did he leave the deed with me?" The silence after that question was heavier than any scream. Lena's chest rose and fell too fast, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a script. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Rachel's voice carried softly up the stairs. "Janine?" "In here," Janine called, eyes never leaving Lena. Rachel appeared moments later, holding her phone, her brow furrowed. "You won't believe what I found." She handed the phone over, the glow of the screen illuminating a familiar email thread. Derek's name at the top. Janine's eyes blurred for a second, but she forced herself to focus. The subject line read, "Mom, keep the house in your name." She scrolled, her son's words plain and undeniable. "I trust you. If anything happens, don't transfer it. Lena doesn't understand money the way you do. Protect the house." The room swayed around her, grief and vindication twisting together in her chest. She passed the phone to Lena, whose face drained as she read. "No," Lena whispered, her voice breaking into a whimper. "He wouldn't." But the proof glowed in front of her, undeniable, unaltered. Every fake inheritance claim, every teary declaration of entitlement, crushed beneath Derek's own words. Janine's throat tightened, but her voice came out sharp and steady. "He knew you'd try this." Lena staggered back, the jewelry box behind her clattering to the floor. Her hand shot to her mouth, as if she could shove the lie back down her throat, but it was too late. Rachel crossed her arms, her voice like steel. "End of the line, Lena." For a long, awful moment, Lena stood frozen, her shoulders shaking. Then she bolted, storming past them down the hall. The front door slammed, rattling the frame. Silence followed, but it wasn't peace. It was the stillness before a storm. Morning light arrived with a cruel twist. The low rumble of a tow truck idled outside, the metallic clang of chains echoing across the cul-de-sac. Janine and Rachel stepped onto the porch, just as two men hooked Lena's SUV to the winch. Lena was already outside, barefoot on the driveway, screaming at the driver. Her voice cracked, raw with rage and panic. "You can't take it. It's mine. It's mine." Neighbors emerged, robes pulled tight, coffee mugs in hand, gathering like an audience. Whispers floated through the humid air. Repossession, fraud, eviction. The car lifted inch by inch, Lena clawing at the door handle until the driver shoved her back. The slam of metal, the screech of chains, the hiss of hydraulics, all of it drowned her sobs. Janine stood on the porch, arms folded, watching as the vehicle lurched forward and rolled down the street. The neighbors' eyes shifted, not toward Lena this time, but toward her, the homeowner, the survivor. And Lena, standing barefoot in the oil-stained driveway, was left with nothing but whispers cutting through the morning air. The morning broke gray and damp, clouds pressing low, as if the sky itself disapproved of what was about to happen. A moving truck should have been parked in the driveway by now, but the street lay empty, silent except for the faint buzz of cicadas rising in the humidity. Lena paced the front lawn barefoot, her phone clutched to her ear, her voice high-pitched with panic. "You promised you'd be here," she barked into the phone. A pause. Her face crumpled. "What do you mean you canceled? I already paid you." From the doorway, Janine leaned against the frame, her arms crossed, calm as a stone. The sheriff's deadline was today. Movers or no movers, Lena was leaving. Inside, the house had been gutted of anything that had once looked polished. Trash bags, stuffed until their seams strained, lined the hallway. Clothes tumbled from open suitcases. The scent of stale wine and bleach clung to the air, sour and biting. Lena stumbled back up the steps, shoving past Janine to grab another armload of clothes. "You're heartless," she snapped, her eyes wild, her face streaked with sweat. Janine didn't move from her place. She simply tilted her head. "You're homeless." The words landed sharper than a slap. Lena froze, her mouth working soundlessly before she stormed into the living room. Outside, neighbors began to gather quietly. Curtains twitched, blinds lifted, bodies lingered at the edges of driveways. The whispers that had chased Lena for weeks now settled openly in the air. Nobody offered help. Nobody asked questions. They simply watched. Rachel appeared at Janine's side, coffee in hand, her voice low. "She's burning every bridge she had." Janine nodded faintly. "And I'm not building her another one." By noon, the house looked more like a yard sale gone wrong than a home. Lena dragged bag after bag to her SUV, tossing them haphazardly into the back seat. Glass clinked, bottles rattling inside. One burst open, wine dripping onto the concrete, sharp and acrid in the humid air. "You'll regret this," Lena shouted suddenly, her voice cracking as she turned toward Janine. "He wanted me here. He loved me, not you." Janine's chest tightened, grief pricking at her ribs, but she didn't waver. She simply stepped back inside, leaving Lena to yell at the porch railing. When the last bag had been shoved into the car, Lena slammed the hatch closed with a hollow bang. She stood for a moment, her hair plastered to her forehead, her chest heaving. The silence from the neighbors was louder than her screams had been. Not one person stepped forward. Janine waited until Lena finally climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door. Then she turned, pulled the spare set of keys from her pocket, and fitted a new lock into the front door. The click echoed like a final nail hammered in place. Rachel sipped her coffee, her eyes fixed on Lena's car. End of the show. Janine's hand lingered on the cool brass of the lock, steadying herself against the surge of both relief and sorrow. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's mine again." The engine coughed to life. Lena revved hard, but the car sputtered under the weight of the bags, exhaust belching a sour black cloud into the cul-de-sac. Slowly, she backed down the driveway, her tires crunching over broken glass from the wine bottle she'd dropped. Janine and Rachel stood in the doorway as the SUV crept forward, stuffed to the brim with garbage bags and bitterness, headed nowhere. And when the car finally turned the corner, disappearing into the hush of the street, the neighbors still watched, but not her. Their eyes followed Lena, vanishing down the very road she had once bragged about living on. For the first time in months, Janine woke to silence that wasn't charged with tension. No slammed doors, no thud of heavy footsteps, no wine bottles rolling across the counter. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the hallway clock. She sat at the edge of her bed, inhaling the clean air of the house that now belonged only to her. The walls seemed to exhale with her, no longer strained by anger. She padded downstairs in her slippers, the hardwood cool beneath her feet. Sunlight spilled through the living room windows, warming the familiar oak furniture. The absence of Lena's perfume, sickly sweet and suffocating, was a relief in itself. Instead, the house carried its old scent again, lemon polish, wood, and the faint trace of Derek's cologne, still clinging to his chair. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Rachel stood there with a bouquet of lilies and sunflowers, wrapped in crisp brown paper. "To the rightful homeowner," she said with a grin. Janine accepted the flowers, pressing them to her chest, the petals brushing her cheek. They're beautiful. So is this house now that it's free of her. Rachel replied, stepping inside. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she set her purse down. How does it feel? Janine placed the flowers in a vase, filling it with water from the sink. She watched the stems shift and settle. It feels like the first breath after drowning. But peace had its cracks. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text flashed across the screen. You'll regret this. He loved me. You can't erase me. Janine's chest tightened. More followed, strings of accusations, threats, even pleas. You're cruel. You stole my future. This isn't over. Her thumb hovered over the screen, the old instinct to argue tugging at her. But she remembered Rachel's words. Assumptions were Lena's blind spot. She refused to give her another chance to twist the narrative. Instead, she went into the settings, blocked the number, and then called the carrier to change her line completely. By evening, Claire phoned to check in. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice carrying that gentle steadiness Janine had come to lean on. The house is mine again. Quiet, Janine said. Quiet is good, Claire reminded her. Closure doesn't need applause, just boundaries. After they hung up, Janine sat alone at the dining room table, Derek's old journal resting before her. She hadn't touched it since his death. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, the pages creaking faintly. His handwriting stretched across the lines, notes about work, sketches of song lyrics, reminders to buy groceries, ordinary words, but to her they pulsed with life. She laughed softly through tears when she found a note he'd scribbled. Buy Mom her favorite cookies. Don't forget this time. She pressed her hand against the ink, as though she could touch him through it. For the first time, the ache of his absence was joined by warmth. The house seemed lighter, as though his presence lingered here, not Lena's shadow. Janine wiped her eyes, smiling through the grief. For the first time, she believed she might heal. But peace never lasted long with Lena. That night, while putting laundry away, Janine opened the closet and froze. Derek's guitar case, the one he had cherished since college, was gone. Her heart lurched. She tore through the closets, the corners of rooms, the basement. Nothing. She dialed Rachel with shaking hands. Rachel, the guitar. Derek's guitar. It's missing. The empty space in the closet gnawed at Janine like an open wound. Derek's guitar had lived there for years, its black case tucked neatly behind coats and old shoes. She could still remember the first time he strummed it on the porch, summer air buzzing with cicadas, his voice carrying into the night. To find the case missing felt like losing him all over again. Rachel arrived within the hour, her blazer thrown on hastily, her eyes sharp with fury. She took it, Janine. She pawned it or sold it off. That's the only explanation. Janine clutched Derek's journal in her lap, her thumb brushing the page where he'd sketched lyrics around a guitar doodle. She didn't just steal wood and strings, Janine whispered. She stole his voice. The next morning they began their search. The first pawn shop smelled of dust and motor oil, the air heavy with old electronics and tarnished jewelry. A glass case displayed watches and rings, but no guitar. The owner shook his head when Rachel described it. 2 more stops yielded nothing. By afternoon, Janine's chest ached with a mix of hope and dread, her palms damp as she pushed through the door of the 4th shop. A faint bell jingled overhead. This place was smaller, the air tinged with stale cigarette smoke and polish. Rows of instruments leaned against the far wall, violins, a saxophone, and then her breath caught. The guitar. Derek's guitar. The glossy black body reflected the fluorescent light, worn at the edges where his hands had played it raw. Her knees nearly buckled. That's it, she whispered. The shop owner, a grizzled man with a fading tattoo across his forearm, followed her gaze. He scratched his jaw. Came in last week. Lady sold it in a hurry. Didn't even haggle, just wanted the cash. Rachel stepped forward. Tall, dark hair, sharp voice. The man let out a low chuckle. That's her. Real piece of work. Thought she was slick, but I've seen her kind plenty. Janine's chest tightened, anger and grief colliding. She approached the counter, her voice firm. How much? The man named a price. Janine didn't blink. She pulled her checkbook from her purse, the pen trembling only slightly as she signed her name. When he handed her the case, the leather felt cool and familiar, as though Derek himself had been waiting inside it. Outside, Janine held the guitar close as Rachel unlocked the car. The late afternoon sun glared off the windshield, but Janine didn't notice. She cradled the case on her lap, the entire ride home, her fingers tracing the worn handle. Back at the house, she carried it to the living room. The smell of lemon polish and fresh flowers lingered from Rachel's bouquet, a clean backdrop for what came next. With careful hands, she wiped the dust from the body, polished the strings, and set it inside a glass display case she'd ordered months earlier but never had the courage to use. When she finally stepped back, tears blurred her vision. Derek's guitar glowed under the lamplight, preserved, honored. For the first time in weeks, her house felt whole. Claire visited that evening, her presence soft as always. She stood before the display, her eyes glistening. "You gave him back his voice," she said quietly. Janine nodded, her throat thick, and took away hers. The words hung in the air, heavy but true. Lena had tried to erase Derek, but instead she had only sharpened Janine's will to preserve him. The night settled calm around the house. Janine brewed chamomile tea, the steam curling into the quiet. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe the war was over. Then Rachel's phone buzzed. She frowned, reading the text, her face darkening. "Janine," she said carefully. "She's trying to sue." The letter arrived in a crumpled envelope, slipped under Janine's door like some coward's message. She bent to pick it up, the paper thin and cheap, printed with an official-looking header, "North Carolina Free Legal Aid Services." The words blurred for a moment, before her eyes focused on the accusations spelled out in bold: elder abuse. Her breath caught. Elder abuse? Rachel was at her side within the hour. The letter spread across the dining table like a poisoned offering. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the lines with a tight jaw. "She's really trying this angle," Rachel muttered, "claiming you manipulated Derek, that you trapped her financially. It's laughable." Janine's hands gripped the edge of the table. Laughable or not, it's still a suit. What if someone believes her? Then we make sure they don't, Rachel said simply. The following afternoon, they walked into the Free Legal Aid office, a plain building with humming fluorescent lights and the stale scent of coffee lingering in the air. Janine carried her folder pressed to her chest like armor. Inside were the documents Lena could never fake. The original deed, the lawyer's notes on the forgery, Derek's email telling her to keep the house in her name. They didn't wait long. A young attorney with tired eyes ushered them into a small conference room lined with case files. Lena was already there, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, lips pressed into a thin smile. She clutched a stack of papers as if they were her ticket back into the house. "Thank you for coming," the attorney said, motioning for everyone to sit. "We're here to review Miss Harrow's claims regarding elder abuse." Lena wasted no time. She pushed her papers across the table, her voice rising with rehearsed indignation. "She's been taking advantage of me since Derek died. She controlled the house, cut me off from his belongings, and now she's trying to throw me on the street. My husband wanted me to have everything, but she twisted it." "Stop." The attorney's voice was calm but final. He slid her papers aside and turned to Janine. "Do you have proof of ownership?" Janine opened her folder with steady hands, the smell of ink and old paper rising faintly as she laid out the document. The attorney's eyes sharpened as he read. The notarized deed, the lawyer's letter on the forged transfer, and finally the email from Derek. Silence filled the room. The hum of the fluorescent light grew louder. Lena's face drained as the attorney finally pushed the papers back toward Janine. "You're wasting our time," he said flatly, turning to Lena. "This isn't elder abuse. This is a homeowner exercising her legal rights. If you pursue this further, you'll be the one facing consequences for fraud." The word fraud landed like a gavel strike. Lena sputtered, her cheeks blotching crimson. "That's not she's lying. Rachel leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with cool precision. Every corner you turn, Lena, it's locked. Janine folded the papers back into her folder, her voice calm, almost pitying. You don't want justice. You want pity. But pity won't keep you housed. The meeting ended swiftly. Lena stormed out, her heels clattering against the linoleum like a drumbeat of desperation. Janine and Rachel lingered for a moment, the attorney shaking his head with a sigh. You'd be surprised how often people try things like this when they're out of options, he said. Out of options. The words lingered as Janine walked back into the Raleigh sun, her folder tucked safely under her arm. By the end of the week, word had spread through the community. At the cafe, Janine overheard whispers. Did you hear? She forged papers, tried to sue her own mother-in-law. At the grocery store, heads turned but not at Janine. It was Lena's name that traveled in hushed tones, her fall from sympathy now complete. The final blow came when Lena tried to rent an apartment in a nearby complex. The landlord, already aware of her reputation, refused. Not here, he told her flatly, shutting the office door before she could argue. That evening, Claire visited. They sat in the living room, the guitar gleaming in its glass case. Claire placed her hand over Janine's. No more shadows, she said softly. Time for light. Janine smiled faintly, her heart aching but lighter than it had been in months. Later, alone at her desk, she opened Derek's digital memorial site. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she typed her name into the beneficiary line. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then clicked save. The evening light poured warm across the living room, painting the hardwood in amber. Janine stood at the center, smoothing the tablecloth with careful hands. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet Lena had mocked. This was a chosen stillness, one filled with purpose. By 6 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Rachel arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and her irrepressible smirk. So this is the big night, she asked, stepping inside. The rightful homeowner throwing her first party. Janine laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. It's not a party, just a gathering. Claire came next, her arms full of bakery boxes, followed by two of Derek's closest friends, Mark and Elise, their faces drawn with the familiar weight of grief, but softened with relief to be here. The house filled with voices, warm and low, carrying through the halls that had too long echoed with shouting. Janine guided them to the far wall of the living room, where a curtain hung over a corner display she had been preparing for weeks. Her hands trembled as she pulled it back, revealing Derek's memory corner. The guitar gleamed in its glass case, framed by photographs, his first band, his wedding day, candid smiles that still glowed with life. Beneath the guitar sat a wooden box filled with letters and journals, the words of a son preserved for the mother who refused to let him vanish. Gasps filled the room. Elise reached for Mark's hand, her eyes welling. Rachel cleared her throat and looked away, blinking fast. Claire stepped closer, her voice hushed. He'd be proud, Janine. Not just of this, of you. The words settled deep. Janine's throat tightened, but she smiled through the ache. I hope so, she whispered. Rachel, ever practical, reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden plaque wrapped in tissue paper. One more thing, she said. From me. Janine unwrapped it slowly. The letters were engraved in clean lines. Harrow House. Since 1997. Her breath caught. She traced the name with her fingertips, the wood warm from Rachel's hands. It's finally mine in every way, she said, her voice low but certain. The evening flowed gently after that. They ate, they shared stories of Derek that drew laughter and tears in equal measure. For the first time since the funeral, the house felt alive again, not with conflict, but with memory and love. Later, when the guests had gone and only Rachel and Claire lingered, Janine stepped onto the porch to say goodbye. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and distant grills from neighboring yards. That's when she saw it. Down the block, parked under a street lamp, Lena's car. Her figure was slumped in the driver's seat, a blanket pulled up to her chin, the glass fogged from her breath. The image struck Janine hard, but no one spoke. Rachel followed her gaze, then looked back at her with a firm shake of the head. No acknowledgement, no pity. Janine nodded faintly, a decision settling over her like a stone in water. She turned away, stepped back inside, and closed the door. The bolt slid into place with a final deliberate click that echoed through the silent house. The dawn broke pale and golden, mist curling low across the lawns of the quiet Raleigh cul-de-sac. Janine sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee warming her hands, steam rising into the cool morning air. For the first time in months, there was no knot of dread in her stomach, no sharp footsteps to brace for. Only peace, slow and blooming, like sunlight creeping across the street. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Claire lit up the screen. "Last session tomorrow, but your story's just beginning." Janine smiled faintly, her thumb tracing the words before setting the phone aside. Claire was right. This wasn't the end, but a beginning shaped by survival, not loss. Moments later, Rachel appeared at the edge of the yard, carrying her usual travel mug, the scent of cinnamon coffee drifting with her. She climbed the porch steps and sat beside Janine, their shoulders brushing in quiet solidarity. "You didn't just win," Rachel said, her voice steady and proud. "You lived." The words sank deep. Janine breathed them in with the morning air, tasting their truth. A breeze stirred the porch, carrying the faint chime of the wind bells Derek had hung years ago. They rang softly, like laughter caught in the air, the sound threading through the house, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The house felt alive again, not haunted, not contested, but claimed. Janine set her mug down and let her gaze drift over the street. "He's still here," she whispered. Her lips curved into something between sorrow and strength. She never really was. And then, as if the street itself demanded closure, Lena's car shuddered to life at the far curb. It groaned forward, loaded with nothing but scraps and resentment, the exhaust spitting against the silence. No neighbors waved. No one watched. The vehicle turned the corner without ceremony, disappearing into a world that had no place left for her. Janine didn't move. She simply breathed, the morning air morned people and sharp against her skin. The house behind her stood tall, the plaque Rachel had gifted her fixed beside the door. Harrow House. Since 1997. A legacy preserved. A home reclaimed. She reached for her coffee, her voice steady, final and unshakable as the words carried across the porch. "After my son died, she told me to pack my bags and get lost, so I packed up the deed and left her on the street.